today I want to talk about fear. So fear has been a big topic for me in my practice and the reason I actually came to the practice. And it's something that a lot of us deal with and a lot of us tend to carry around. It's an issue for a lot of people. So fear is an interesting phenomenon in that there's two types of fear from what I know. The first kind of fear, which someone like Krishnamurti talks about, is the fear you experience when you encounter a bear or a large animal or a wild dog. And that fear causes you to get out of that situation as soon as you can, which is healthy. The fear that I'm talking about, and the fear that most of us have, is more of a quiet, latent fear that we walk around with at all times. Maybe that's one. This is part of our conditioning. As a child, you're asked to behave in a certain way, and if you fail to behave in that way, then you get reprimanded and you develop a fear. And then that kind of grows into all spheres of life. We're pleasing people. We're afraid that if we don't say the right thing or we don't do the right thing, then we'll be met with disapproval. That sort of fear. And then another aspect of that fear is fear about fear itself. I don't want to feel anxious, and if I feel anxious, that makes me more anxious. It makes me more fearful. So we're constantly dealing with a fear of loss. In a sense, it's loss. So loss of approval, loss of security, loss of health. And I think those, for me, in the way I see it, are the three kinds of psychological fears that we all carry. And a big one is a fear of losing approval, of losing the approval of the people around you and what they would think. And this is one reason people walk around so armored. They're armored and they don't want to be seen as weak, and they don't want to be seen as wrong, and they want to say the right thing, and they want to do the right thing, and that is a fear. Another big fear is the fear of losing your health. Now, the body is not 100% in our control, as anyone who's had any sort of illness or suffering can tell you, and you can tell yourself. You might think that it's all under your control, but it's not. Sometimes it'll do things that you don't want it to do, and you can develop a fear of that. So really, there's these aspects that make up fear. There's the real direct fear, which is fear of a large animal or someone attacking you, and that's a useful fear. And there's the psychological fears, which might be useful to some extent. They become less useful when they become chronic. And what I mean by chronic is when fear starts to control how you live your life. And this can be subtle or it can be quite gross. In order to address it, one has to get to the root of it. So, I mean, this is something that I've heard, and once again, it's from Krishnamurti, who I've been listening to quite a lot lately. And I can also relate to it from my own personal experience with fear. So, fear is related to time, right? So, what will happen in the future, right? In the future, will I lose my health? Will I lose the approval of the people that I respect? Will I lose security? Right? This is something that we're projecting into the future. The mind is projecting into the future. And time is really thought in motion. So you're projecting into the future. In the present moment, as you are right now, here, being with things as they are, is there fear? Would there be fear if you were here in the present moment? Fully present with what is, the way things are. You don't have discursive thoughts going on in your mind, you're just here present. Now, there isn't fear. But as soon as you start to project into the future, as soon as you start to think what might happen, then fear comes up. So fear is related to thought. Is how can you get to the root of fear so that you can cut it off at the root. So time is moving into the future. And yes, you have to plan for the future for things and you have to be sensible. But the problem is this becomes chronic. It becomes chronic and it can get so chronic that it starts to act on your physicality. So you start to have symptoms in your body. You know, migraines, feeling queasy, all kinds of physical symptoms, palpitations. And then once things get to that level where it's gone into the physical body, then it's very, very, very difficult to uproot. You can't uproot it just using your intellect or something like that. Maybe you could try to be present, but it's actually very, very difficult when those symptoms have gone to that stage where it's entered your body. So how do you deal with it? And my own experience of experiencing this type of fear, the way I got through it was to stop being afraid of it, to say, I surrender. It's this surrender, but in the same vein, it's a sense of bravery. So you say, let this just kill me. Do what it's going to do. If it's going to destroy me, then so be it. And that's a big step, because you only get to that step when you know no one's going to come and rescue you from that fear. When you withdraw from that fear, it comes back stronger. Right? From a meditation perspective, what I would say works is the principle of metta, or acceptance. So in the moment when fear, this sort of intense, compulsive, chronic fear comes up where it's in your body, of course you can use meditation to relax the body in that moment. can surrender. You can say, okay, here's fear. Do what you have to do, right? And once you open to it in that sort of way, when you completely surrender, it sort of disappears. You face it and surrender to it. So it's a paradox. You're saying, I'm not going to let this defeat me, so I'll go into it. And at the same time, you're being compassionate to the being that's actually feeling the fear. You're saying, I get it, this isn't nothing. Because a lot of people will tell you fear, this is just your imagination, and it's just psychological, and it's not real, but it's very, very real in the moment. It's very real. It's as real as coming face to face with the real tiger, not an imaginary one. And at that moment, you have to accept that it's real. You have to accept that it's here. And some way you need to find the courage to face it. And personally, I would not rule medical intervention or drugs at this stage if it's become so chronic that it completely takes over your body, which it can do. And you feel that you have no control over this. And the truth is, you don't have any control. And the more we work with this sort of fear, the more we realize that life at a grander scale is something that's not in control, not in our control. It's not really in control. It's sort of happening. We have some control over it. Came into my mind at one stage was, how would you behave if you weren't always acting out of fear? Out of fear of disapproval of other people, fear of losing what you have. How would you act? And like people say, like the saying goes, the opposite of fear is love. And I guess when you remove that fear, then you're acting from a place of love. So fear is not something simple. It's not something that can be rationalized away. It needs to be faced with compassion and with care.